So we were first tipped off to these most recent project delays last week when Vancouver's mayor sort of let off some steam about it at the end of a Clark County transportation meeting. This week, those concerns were backed up by state lawmakers. Here's Oregon Senator Confam. You won't see her, but you will hear her. Let's listen.
And now it looks like the earliest we could have a record of decision would be April of 2026, which is 2.5 years later than what we were told in 2020, the Oregon legislature. And I'm just concerned because this is driving up costs for Oregon and Washington taxpayers. And when we miss our deadlines, it really does have an impact on our transportation budget as we try to find the funding to make up for the increased costs.
Now, two worlds collide this week as Oregon's transportation funding woes, still unresolved by the way, come up in discussions about the new I-5 bridge project. The project is aiming to break ground next year, but there are three key things that need to happen first, and that's where delays seem to be piling up. Number one, the project needs to finish the federal environmental review process, which ends with a record of decision, basically the federal green light to start construction. It was supposed to be done around this time of year, but now appears to be bumped to April. Number two, the Coast Guard needs to give a final answer about whether it will allow the new bridges to sit closer to the water than the maximum height of the current drawbridge. Number three, the project team needs to publish an updated cost estimate. Now let's pause on those last two for a moment. When it comes to the Coast Guard's concerns, the Interstate Bridge Replacement Team, or IBR, wants to build the new bridge without a drawbridge section, but that means it'll have about 60 feet less clearance than the current bridge. So they have to convince the Coast Guard that everyone upriver can live with that. If they can't, then the new bridge will have to be a drawbridge too. That negotiation has been going on for years and doesn't really have a clear end date, but it does have a deadline. The record of decision will only approve one design, so the drawbridge question must be resolved before that. And then we can't forget about the cost. The latest estimate for the project came out 2 years ago in January, ranging from $5 to $7.5 billion. But with inflation, the cost is expected to be higher. IBR said last year that they were working on an updated cost estimate, but were waiting until the environmental review and design work got farther along so they could be more precise. But all of these moving parts and delays from the original timeline have lawmakers in both Oregon and Washington running out of patience.
We've been waiting a long time for an updated cost estimate, and we do have a meeting, if I'm correct, on December 15th, which is pretty late in 2025, and I believe about a year since we were promised one. I would really request that we actually have an updated cost estimate for that December 15th meeting, please. Thank you.
Now, we followed up with IBR to see if they could hit that deadline, and they said they're planning to, so we'll have to wait and see. Right now, the project is in relatively good financial shape if the cost comes in around $6 billion. All told, it's got about $4.3 billion lined up from federal grants and state funding. And both states have authorized tolling, which is expected to bring in anywhere from $1.2 to $1.6 billion. The last piece is another $1 billion federal grant for light rail, which is still in the application process. But all together, and the project would have between $6 and $7 billion if tolling revenue comes in high enough and that light rail grant comes through, neither of which are guaranteed. And even if all that works out, again, the upper end of the cost estimate from 2023 is $7.5 billion. If the new cost estimate winds up higher than that, which is a possibility, then there's a problem. And that's not to mention other potential financial pitfalls next year. One of them is the Coast Guard drawbridge question. It's called a movable span, which came up in the meeting with state lawmakers this week.
If the movable span becomes the option, is it still possible to begin construction in 2026? And do you have a rough idea on what that would add to the cost of the project? Thank you.
At this point, we know some of the other spans that will be fixed could begin construction on our original schedule. And while the movable span itself, which is 400 feet of 3,000 feet of bridge, that span can be designed, can be procured going out into the future. But we know that it will be more costly. We have shared this with the Coast Guard based on our last estimate. We had pegged that cost at over $400 million additional to build a movable span. But we still think that we can hold our schedule to get in water to start construction on the Columbia River Bridge itself as we have projected.
So another $400 million minimum and more design time for the drawbridge, although other parts of the project could still start construction next year. And we learned about another financial risk this week if the start of construction is pushed past 2026.
We have grants that have to be obligated and agreed to in 2026, or we have the potential of having those grants expire. So we have some hard deadlines that we are putting on the table for folks to keep our schedule of getting to a record of decision in 2026.
IBR said the specific deadline is September 30th of next year. They have to start spending a large chunk of one of the federal grants on construction by then. So you can see why the record of decision getting pushed back to April is making people nervous. And no one's quite saying it, but we can imagine it's a bit frustrating for the federal review to be dragging on long enough to push up against the federal construction deadline, assuming the April date holds for that record of decision. That's a window of just 5 months to put contracts out and get shovels in the ground. IBR told us they can do it. They've already got the project broken up into construction packages. The bridge itself is supposed to be one of the first to get underway, but there's plenty of other work that can get started in 2026, even if they end up having to take more time to design a drawbridge. But still, that's a lot that has to go right, a lot that could go wrong, and an increasingly narrow window for all of it to happen. We'll be watching.